none of them are false, by the way. I want to be clear. I'm not putting up a straw man in that sense. Why might you want to be skeptical? Okay, let's hear the other side. Economics. Okay, next slide. Well, the you've got to make these reactors cheap enough to be able to buy a lot of them to get the economics of scale. And the argument is, well, if we make a lot of these reactors, even though they don't make much electricity, the cost of building each of these things will decline dramatically. Remember that learning curve? Well, the learning curve is going to be really good. And we're going to lower the costs such that it will be competitive with natural gas, which that's pretty brassy. Why? Natural gas is really cheap, really cheap. It's the cheapest form of electricity going that you can control and peak. I'm sure solar and wind is cheaper, but you don't. You have to use storage to peak it, and so it costs a bit more because that storage is not cheap. In any case, they assume mass production will overcome, will drive down high capital costs and the installed cost per kilowatt hour. However, so far, there has been one firm that went as far as anyone in getting their design qualified. It's called NewScale. Um, that project, which I know something about since I winter in Utah, was to service municipalities in Utah. It went under. It went under when they themselves claimed the plant was going to cost, are you ready for this? $9.3 billion for 465 megawatts. That's more than that Vocal plant. That's really expensive. Now, it could be that if they made a lot of them, they could get around that, and they're hoping still to do that. Uh, they're not there yet. Uh, Also, the reactors they want them to rely on new fuels. I don't think they do. They can operate on low enriched uranium, but the energy department's very keen on them using 20%. And those fuels again cost more. Uh, the You take a look at the advanced reactors. Many of the advanced designs, I think more than half, are fast reactor technologies. They use plutonium or highly enriched uranium. I shouldn't call it highly, medium enriched uranium of about 20%. Why is that a concern? Well, we'll get to that in a moment, but the history of those kinds of reactors has been very unkind to them being very affordable. Um, then there are lots of other ways to reduce greenhouse gases that don't involve nuclear energy at all. Um, and you probably can get more out of the electrical system right now than we currently get. Finally, some of the proposed designs are like 300 megawatts, or in the case of the Natrium reactor, even larger. They're not so small. So let's take a look further into this. If you take a look at previous small reactors, and these are all under, it looks like 20. Well, one's 185. They all shut down. They could not compete. So it isn't as though we don't have some data points. These were not modular reactors, is the argument, though. And if they were modular, they argue they would have made a lot of them and they would have been cheaper. Okay, but small really runs a disadvantage historically. Next slide.
Mr.
Uh,
Sokolski,
yeah,
did those historical designs, did those use LEU or some form of HALO?
let's go back. That's a good question. I want to say they probably all used light water reactor. Fort Frayne it was a high temperature gas cooled reactor, and it used probably. I want to. That's a good question. You look up Saint Frayne. I got to believe the enrichment level may have been higher than 3%. How much higher is a good question. But the others look to be LWRs, which are light water reactors, you know, small ones. All right, let's go to the next slide. Uh, oh, could you go back to the next slide? There we go. People don't realize it, but the current Vocal plant, the current French EPR that was built in Finland and France, and it's being built in China, is a modular reactor. It's just a large one. So the modularity didn't buy those large machines any advantages. They still turned out to be extremely expensive. The modularity feature did not help drive down those costs at all, as best we can tell. And we're hoping that in the case of the small one, it will. Okay, maybe. All right, next slide. And they want to go to fast reactors. Now, this probably Oklo, natrium, I know are going concerns. I think these others, I want to say, have been, I wouldn't say, shelved, but pushed aside. But if you take a look, there are a number of advanced reactors on the DOE side. I'd say about half of them are fast reactor designs, and we'll get into that Friday as to what that involves. But go to the next chart. Here is a history of sodium cooled, which is a fast reactor. Um, this is the green one is the sodium cooled reactor in Japan. Uh, the yellow is what the heck is the yellow? Gas cooled. That would be like Saint Fontverrain. The boiling water and the purple, I've got to believe, is a light water, pressurized light water. Well, the red and purple are, like 90% of the reactors or more in the world. You'll notice that when you go to the green and blue track record for capital construction costs, it's a multiple of those. Now, I've already established that a gas plant is a fraction of what a nuclear, red or purple bar would look like. To pick a design that has a track record of the blue and green bar to cut costs is pretty brassy. It may work, but it's certainly you got to hope history doesn't rhyme. Because the reason why is sodium. Does anybody know what happens if sodium touches water? Explodes. It has to do with oxygen. Well, oxygen can also be the air, and you can get explosions. And you can also get explosions if the liquid sodium touches concrete, which has crystalline water in it. I mean, this is quite a show. Also, sodium can get, if it cools, can clog things up. So when people talk about the inherent safety value of sodium cooled reactors, that's fine. And they list some features. They forget to list the other features where it's a safety liability. And each one of these things has, some downside that people don't want to talk about. There's a reason why the light water reactor became prevalent. Is it optimal? In many respects, I'd have to say no. But it's a matter of compared to what? You'd like to have something safer than a light water reactor for obvious reasons, but it isn't obvious that just anything is safer than it. And some of the things that we're backing, you're really climbing quite a tall order. Some of the most interesting designs, like NuScale, are light water reactors, and there are some attractive safety features to them. Um, but when you get to the fast reactors, man, I mean, I don't know. Good luck. Okay, next slide. Not only that, they're the economics of these things. If they use recycling or medium enriched fuel, you got to test the fuel. You got to make the fuel, and they want the U.S. government and taxpayer to pay for that. Those are additional costs in the billions. I guess we don't care, but that you got to somehow internalize that into the cost of each one of these machines. It's part of the cost. Next slide. Now, we'll get back to this when we get to the economics, but uh, this is called a greenhouse gas cost abatement curve. There are many models. This one happens to be a McKinsey model used by environmentalists and the nuclear industry, which is hilarious. They use the same standard. And what this shows is that there are a lot of things, about 11 things you would do before you would build a new nuclear power plant to reduce a certain amount of carbon, because there are quicker, cheaper ways to do it than building a new power plant. This particular slide was shown by the head of the largest merchant nuclear utility in the world 3 days before Fukushima at a briefing at the American Enterprise Institute. And he said, I'd love to build nuclear power plants. I'm a nuclear power guy, but it's number 11 on the list of things to do, so we're not going to do it. Next slide. Well, this is showing that the costs of storage are becoming more attractive, while the capital costs and the levelized cost for nuclear is not doing well against any of its competitors, whether it's coal, natural gas, or renewables. I don't think that has changed. Whether it's small, whether it's modular, whether it's advanced or large, it's still the energy choice of governments. I mean, because you cannot get a private bank to invest. Now, there's some talk that that may change. But when I called Goldman Sachs, who released a statement that the private banking firms were open to this, I said, "Are they going to do anything? Have they opened their wallets?" And he said, "Well, no." I said, and he said, "Stay tuned." So all I can ask of you is pay attention to that. My hunch is that private banks will invest if there's no risk, and that will require more government subsidies. Whereas they will invest in natural gas and even to some extent now renewables that don't have as much subsidies as they used to because of the strong, or clear revenue streams and amortization curves. I mean, the risk levels are much lower for those things. Okay.